It was a brisk fall morning in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Capitol was buzzing with unusual intensity. Reporters, cameramen, and political commentators crowded the marble hallways, their equipment set up to catch every moment of what was rumored to be a fiery showdown. On the agenda was a heated debate over new federal guidelines for the education system, a topic that had already divided lawmakers across party lines. But the real reason the room was packed wasn't the policy itself. It was the two figures about to face off, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, of New York. Over the past few weeks, AOC had been relentlessly mocking Kennedy's proposals during press briefings and on social media. She portrayed his approach as outdated and clueless, earning millions of likes and retweets from her supporters. In one viral post, she wrote, "His policies feel like they were pulled straight out of a 1960s black and white commercial." Her fans applauded her boldness, while critics warned that her mockery could backfire spectacularly. When the session began, AOC took the floor first. With her usual sharp tone and expressive gestures, she delivered a speech laced with ridicule. She argued that Kennedy's proposed education guidelines were confusing, poorly thought out, and completely detached from modern reality. Then she delivered the line that would send the room into an uproar. "Honestly, even a shampoo bottle has better instructions than Kennedy's bill." The chamber erupted with mixed reactions. Laughter from some corners, groans and gasps from others. Kennedy sat quietly, jotting down notes, a subtle smile playing on his face. Those familiar with him recognized that expression. It was the calm before the storm. As AOC wrapped up her speech, all eyes shifted to Kennedy. Slowly, he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the podium with the steady confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was about to unleash. The atmosphere in the chamber grew tense, everyone could sense that a verbal sledgehammer was coming. As Kennedy approached the podium, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. The light overhead reflected off the polished wood, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. He wasn't rushing. He never did. Instead, he placed his notes neatly in front of him, adjusted the microphone, and let the silence build like a drawn bowstring. Even the reporters, who were usually whispering or typing away, had stopped to watch. "Madam Speaker," Kennedy began slowly, his southern drawl deliberate and measured, "I reckon I've heard a lot of things in this chamber over the years, but being compared to a shampoo bottle is a new one." A ripple of laughter spread through the room, but it wasn't the mocking kind. It was the kind that signaled people were ready for a comeback. He leaned forward slightly. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez thinks my education bill doesn't give enough direction. Well, ma'am, maybe that's because unlike a shampoo bottle, I trust the American people to use their brains without needing step-by-step instructions." His words sliced through the chamber like a hot knife. AOC shifted slightly in her seat, maintaining her smirk, but the cameras caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. Kennedy wasn't finished. "Now, I don't usually respond to playground insults," he continued, "but if someone's gonna stand here and reduce serious policy work to the back of a bathroom product, I think the American people deserve a real response." He then gestured toward the gallery packed with teachers, parents, and students who had come to witness the hearing. "These folks don't want cheap theatrics. They want solutions. They want clarity. And they don't need someone on social media telling them they're too dumb to understand a policy unless it comes with a lather rinse repeat sticker on top." The chamber erupted, half with laughter, half with applause. The intensity of the moment shifted dramatically. Kennedy wasn't playing defense. He was taking control of the room, and even AOC could feel it. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, waiting for her turn to fire back, but the senator wasn't done laying the groundwork. He paused, letting the tension settle like a storm gathering power over calm waters. AOC didn't waste a second after Kennedy finished. She leaned toward the mic with the kind of energy that had made her a star on social media. "Well, Senator," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I'm glad to see you finally read something, even if it's just a shampoo bottle. The Democrats behind her burst out laughing, clapping and tapping their desks in approval. She stood up from her chair, pacing like a performer who knew every camera in the chamber was locked onto her. The senator from Louisiana talks about trusting the American people, she continued, pointing toward Kennedy, but what he's really saying is, here's a vague bill, figure it out yourselves. That's not leadership. That's laziness dressed up as folksy charm. Kennedy didn't flinch. He just watched her calmly, which seemed to irritate her even more. AOC raised her voice. This isn't a bathroom, Senator. This is the United States Congress. And the people deserve better than policies written like cheap product instructions from the 1950s. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some reporters nodded eagerly, sensing a headline in the making. AOC was in her element, loud, confident, turning her rebuttal into a performance. Maybe you can make jokes down in Louisiana, she said sharply, but here in Washington, people want clarity, accountability, and vision, not shampoo metaphors and cowboy talk. For a split second, it looked like she had scored. Some members were smiling, enjoying her fiery delivery. But Kennedy's face remained unreadable, like a chess player watching an opponent fall into a trap. Then she went one step too far. She turned toward the public gallery and said, "This is exactly why we need younger leadership. Because the old guard," she gestured directly at Kennedy, "is too busy making bathroom jokes to do their jobs." The laughter from her side grew louder. But among the journalists, a different kind of anticipation was building. Everyone knew what usually happened when someone tried to humiliate Kennedy in public. He struck back hard, not with yelling, but with precision. As she sat down, looking satisfied, Kennedy slowly adjusted his tie. The camera zoomed in. The energy in the room shifted. Everyone could feel it, something sharp was coming. Kennedy waited until the room quieted down. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He simply leaned toward the microphone, his hands clasped together like a professor about to correct a reckless student. "Representative," he began in that slow, unmistakable Southern drawl, "I've heard a lot of speeches in this chamber. Yours might just be the loudest shampoo commercial I've ever witnessed." The chamber broke into muffled laughter. Even some on AOC's side couldn't help but smile at the sharp jab. Kennedy's tone was calm, surgical. "Now," he continued, "you keep talking about clarity. About leadership. About the future. But you're standing here comparing federal legislation to a bottle of Pantene. You're not clarifying anything, ma'am, you're performing. AOC stiffened in her seat. Kennedy straightened his posture, his voice tightening like a coiled spring. "You talk about the bold guard, but Representative, experience isn't the problem here. Immaturity is. Leadership isn't about trending hashtags and fiery one-liners. It's about understanding the consequences of the words you use in this chamber." The crowd fell silent, leaning in. "And let me tell you something," Kennedy said, lowering his voice, "when you mock serious work with bathroom humor, you don't look like the future. You look like a child throwing a tantrum because she didn't read the instructions." The reaction was immediate, a mix of gasps, applause, and scattered boos. But Kennedy wasn't done. He picked up his pen, twirling it between his fingers, and added, "And as for your claim that this bill is vague, maybe if you spent less time performing for cameras and more time reading the actual text, you'd know it's clearer than your latest policy proposal, which, if I remember correctly, was shorter than a shampoo slogan." Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Headlines were already forming. AOC forced a smile, but the tension in her posture betrayed her irritation. Kennedy's words had landed with precision. He glanced briefly at the speaker, then back to AOC. "I didn't come here to sell hair products, Representative," he finished dryly. "I came here to govern." The room erupted. Laughter, applause, even a few standing ovations from his side. AOC's smirk had vanished. The spotlight that had once favored her was now squarely on Kennedy, and he was owning the moment. AOC wasn't going to let Kennedy have the last laugh, not in front of the cameras, not with millions watching. She shot up from her seat before the applause had even died down, her hands gripping the edge of the podium. Her eyes flashed with the kind of righteous anger that had made her a viral sensation more than once. "Senator Kennedy," she began, her voice sharp like a whip, "what you just said isn't leadership, it's condescension." The chamber quieted immediately. "You call me a performer? You've turned patronizing Southernisms into a political brand. You mock passion because it threatens the stale, outdated politics you represent." Her words echoed through the chamber. She pointed toward him, voice rising with each sentence. "I don't care if you've been here for decades. I don't care how many fancy metaphors you throw around. The truth is, your so-called experience has given us broken schools, failing infrastructure, and a system where the powerful protect each other while everyday Americans get left behind." Democrats erupted into applause and cheers. AOC stepped closer to the mic, breathing heavily, her hands gesturing with precision. "You can laugh at me. You can try to humiliate me. But millions of young people across this country see through this act. They're tired of being lectured like children by the same politicians who got us into this mess." Kennedy remained seated, arms crossed, his expression as calm as a still pond. But AOC wasn't done. She turned to the speaker. "This isn't about Shampoo. This isn't about who can make the wittiest comeback. This is about a generation demanding clarity and accountability, and the senator from Louisiana just gave them smugness instead." The chamber buzzed with electricity. Reporters leaned forward, sensing this was no longer a playful exchange, it had turned personal. AOC's voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from raw intensity. "I may be younger. I may be newer. But I will not be talked down to like I don't belong here." She took a breath, her final words cutting through the air like a blade. "Senator Kennedy, the days of your clever insults going unchecked are over." The crowd roared. Even some Republicans shifted in their seats, recognizing that this was more than banter, it was a generational clash, a battle of political philosophies, live and unfiltered. Kennedy slowly rose from his chair. His calm demeanor hadn't cracked, but his eyes sharpened. The real fight was about to begin. Kennedy stood slowly, almost deliberately, like a man who knew exactly how to pick his moment. The roar of the chamber faded as he approached the podium again, his calmness contrasting sharply with AOC's fiery energy. He adjusted his jacket, leaned into the microphone, and spoke with that slow, deliberate Southern cadence that demanded attention. "Representative," he began, his voice low but carrying, "I've been called a lot of things in my time, but condescending by someone who just compared Congress to a shampoo bottle? That's a new one." Laughter rippled through the chamber again, but Kennedy didn't crack a smile. He raised a single finger. "You say my words are outdated. You say they belong to another generation. Maybe so. But here's the thing about wisdom, it doesn't expire like a trending hashtag. It grows stronger with time." His gaze swept across the room, locking briefly on AOC. "And while you're busy chasing retweets, I've been busy writing legislation that actually helps people instead of making TikToks about it." AOC shifted slightly in her seat. Kennedy took another step forward, his voice tightening. "You talk about broken schools and infrastructure like I'm the one who broke them. Representative, your party's been running some of those states into the ground for decades. You inherited problems you've been part of. Don't come here blaming shampoo metaphors for your failure to lead." The chamber buzzed. Reporters' fingers were flying. Kennedy's tone sharpened. "You say young people are tired of being lectured. Maybe they are. But they're also tired of being lied to. They're tired of performance over progress. They're tired of politicians who confuse going viral with making a difference." He leaned closer to the mic, locking eyes with her. "And here's the truth, Representative, passion without discipline is just noise. And Washington has enough noise. A wave of applause swept through his side of the chamber, louder and more sustained this time. Even some neutral members nodded. Kennedy wasn't yelling, he didn't need to. His precision was the weapon. Then, with a subtle smirk, he added the final sting, and if you think my words are smug, well, maybe it's because the truth stings a little more than a shampoo bottle slogan. The reaction was explosive, laughter, applause, even a few gasps. AOC clenched her jaw. The pendulum had swung back, and everyone in the room felt it. Kennedy had just taken control of the narrative again, not through volume, but through strategy. AOC's jaw tightened as the applause echoed through the chamber. She wasn't going to let Kennedy walk away as the hero of this showdown. She stood up again, practically slamming her hand onto the podium, and leaned forward with the kind of intensity that made every camera in the room zoom in instinctively. "Oh, so now the senator from Louisiana wants to lecture me about leadership?" she snapped, her voice laced with fire. "This is the same man who spent years defending a system that benefits his rich friends while pretending to be some folksy man of the people. Spare me the bedtime stories." The Democratic side erupted with cheers and table taps. She continued, gaining momentum. "You say I'm chasing retweets? You're chasing headlines by playing the wise old cowboy who always has a clever comeback. But guess what? Clever comebacks don't fix broken communities." Kennedy didn't move, watching her like a chess player anticipating the next move. AOC sensed it and pushed harder. "You talk about discipline and wisdom like you invented it. But the reality is, you've had decades to fix these problems, and yet here we are, crumbling schools, underfunded communities, systemic inequality. You had your turn, Senator. And you failed." The chamber was heating up. AOC pointed directly at Kennedy, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You think my generation is noise? No. We're the alarm clock. We're here to wake up this country from the decades-long nap that politicians like you have been taking." Some in the audience gasped at the directness of the jab. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards. This was the kind of exchange that made national headlines. "And let me make something clear," she said, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "You can make as many shampoo jokes as you want, Senator. But the truth is, you represent a past that refuses to make way for the future. And that's why people are done listening to you." She stepped back from the mic, crossing her arms defiantly, her expression screaming challenge. The chamber buzzed with electricity, half the room on their feet, half glaring in tense silence. Kennedy tilted his head slightly, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't look rattled. If anything, he looked like a man who had been waiting for this exact move. The real counterstrike was coming, and everyone could feel it. Kennedy approached the podium once more, this time with the quiet confidence of someone about to deliver a knockout without raising his voice. He adjusted the microphone with one hand, his gaze fixed on AOC. The room hushed instantly. You could practically feel the anticipation pulsing through the chamber. "Representative," he began slowly, "you've given us quite the speech. Plenty of fire. Plenty of hashtags. Not a lot of facts." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Kennedy's tone sharpened. "You say I've had decades to fix things. Well, ma'am, I've spent decades doing more than making speeches for social media clips. I've written legislation, negotiated across the aisle, and passed bills that actually improve lives. Meanwhile, you've made headlines for comparing Congress to shampoo and throwing tantrums when people don't clap loud enough." The chamber chuckled nervously. Even some of her colleagues looked down. Kennedy continued, each word precise. "You call yourself the alarm clock. But an alarm clock without a plan is just noise at 5 a.m., annoying, loud, and quickly ignored. Leadership isn't about waking people up, it's about knowing what to do once they're awake." The audience erupted in laughter and applause. Kennedy didn't smile. He leaned in closer to the mic, his voice lowering. And let's talk about failure. You accuse me of defending a broken system. But you've spent your entire career criticizing everything while contributing next to nothing. You've had opportunities to work with others, to shape policy, but instead, you chose the stage over the substance. AOC shifted uncomfortably. Kennedy pressed on. You talk about the future. Well, the future deserves better than empty theatrics. It deserves hard work, collaboration, and yes, respect for the institution you're standing in. If you think being loud is the same as being effective, you've mistaken the applause of your followers for the trust of the American people. His final line came like a hammer, and I don't care how many followers you have on Instagram, Representative. History doesn't remember influencers. It remembers leaders. The chamber erupted, applause, cheers, even a few standing ovations. Kennedy stepped back from the podium like a man who knew he'd just ended the round decisively. AOC sat still, her jaw clenched, her usual spark dimmed under the weight of his precision. The headlines were already writing themselves. The chamber was still echoing with applause when AOC leaned forward, gripping the edge of the podium like someone refusing to go down without a fight. Her usual smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped determination. She waited for the noise to die, then spoke, her voice low but burning with emotion. You know what, Senator, she began, staring directly at Kennedy. You can throw all the clever one-liners you want. You can act like you're above it all. But the truth is, this isn't about shampoo jokes or social media. This is about a country that's slipping further and further away from the people who need it the most. She stood tall, her voice gaining power. You talk about history remembering leaders. You're right. History will remember the ones who stood up when it wasn't easy. The ones who spoke out even when the room laughed at them. And if that means I'm the alarm clock, fine. I'll wake this country up every single day until the walls of this broken system crack. There were cheers from her side, but they lacked the unshakable confidence they'd had earlier. AOC pressed forward anyway. You accuse me of empty theatrics. But at least I'm not sitting back, pretending that old solutions can fix new problems. At least I'm not hiding behind decades of power while communities suffer. She leaned into the microphone. I'd rather be accused of being loud than remembered as someone who stayed silent when change was needed. A flicker of fire returned to her eyes. You think this ends with your fancy metaphors and applause lines? No. This is just the beginning. Because for every person who claps for you in this chamber, there are millions outside who are tired of being dismissed, belittled, and ignored. And they're listening to me. Her voice cracked slightly on the last line, not from weakness, but raw intensity. The chamber was split in half, one side applauding, the other silent, watching Kennedy carefully. He hadn't moved. His hands were folded, his gaze steady. He approached the podium one last time, slowly, deliberately. Everyone knew what was coming. This was the moment, the closer, that would define the entire exchange. Kennedy rose one last time, not with haste but with the calm confidence of someone who knew the final word would be his. The chamber fell into a tense, almost cinematic silence. He walked to the podium slowly, straightened his jacket, and adjusted the microphone as if setting the stage for the closing act of a play. Representative, he began softly, his voice steady but cutting through the silence like a blade, you keep calling yourself the alarm clock. But let me tell you something about alarm clocks, they're loud, they're annoying, and eventually, people hit snooze. A ripple of laughter spread across the chamber, quickly growing into louder applause. Kennedy didn't flinch. His eyes locked on AOC with sharp precision. You say I hide behind power. I don't hide behind anything. I stand on the work I've done. Decades of legislation. Bipartisan negotiations. Hard decisions. That's what leadership looks like. It's not glamorous. It's not trending. It's not meant to make people cheer like they're watching a late-night talk show. His tone grew firmer. You say you speak for millions. Maybe you do. But speaking isn't the same as leading. You can rally a crowd, representative. I'll give you that. But when the cameras shut off, when the hashtags fade, when the applause dies down, what have you actually built? The room was silent now, no laughter, no whispers, just the weight of his words. Kennedy leaned closer to the mic. History doesn't remember the noisemakers. It remembers the builders. The problem is, you've mistaken volume for value. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even some of her closest allies glanced at her nervously. Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly. And if you think clever slogans and social media storms will change the course of this country, then representative, you're not leading the future. You're distracting it. The applause exploded, deafening, sustained, filling every corner of the room. Some stood to their feet. Kennedy didn't smile. He simply gave a small nod, turned from the podium, and walked back to his seat like a man who knew he'd just delivered the finishing blow. AOC sat still, hands clasped tightly in front of her, her fire dimmed beneath the weight of the moment. Reporters rushed out of the chamber, already crafting headlines that would dominate the next news cycle. Kennedy hadn't just won the exchange, he had turned it into a moment that would be replayed, quoted, and remembered for years. And there you have it. Once again, Senator Kennedy didn't just respond, he obliterated the argument, point by point, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. This wasn't just a debate, it was a masterclass in political combat. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny the impact of that final blow. Moments like this don't just happen, they shape conversations across the nation. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over.